Makwetla winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And it's a very good evening to you. A warm welcome to you for the Thursday edition of Africa World Hour. I am Tsepiso Makwetla. Thank you so much for joining us as we take you from the heart of Africa to all the corners of the world, your world, 60 minutes, one planet, countless stories. Join us as we navigate through the day's top stories from the continent and beyond as we bring you the news, the voices and the perspectives that matter. Welcome to it. Just a reminder that you can stream live. We are on channel 802 on DSTV Audio Bouquet. On OpenView channel, you'll find us on channel 638, and you can also download the SABC Plus app, stream us live. Welcome to the program that just tells you what's happening around the world, but we also would like to hear from you what is happening in your world. Share with us your perspectives, what is shaping the conversations that you are having, what's happening around your communities. Let us know so that we can reflect it. Your WhatsApp voice notes on 063-406-9126. Let's take a look at your top stories this hour. Zambia's former president Edgar Lungu, who died last week, left instructions that his successor Hakainde Hichilema should not be anywhere near his body. This is the latest development in the bitter feud over funeral plans for the late president following his death in South Africa at the age of 68. Elizabeth Mapari has more.
The government had planned to fly his body back home on Wednesday, but failed to do so because of a dispute with Lungu's family and his political party, the Patriotic Front, over mourning and funeral arrangements. The two leaders had been long-standing political rivals, with Hichilema defeating Lungu in the 2021 election after failing in 5 previous attempts. The PEF alleged that Lungu was banned from leaving the country for years, and that if he had been allowed to travel to seek medical treatment sooner, he might still be alive. The government has denied the allegation. It says it wants to give Lungu, who led Zambia from 2015 to 2021, a state funeral.
And a convoy of activists from Tunisia, Algeria and Libya want to send a clear message to Israel to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. About 1,000 Tunisians and other nationals started the land trip from Tunis on Monday. They have been joined by Libyan participants. Some South Africans are also taking part in what they dubbed as a convoy of steadfastness to break the siege imposed on the people of Gaza. Trent Murray has more from Tel Aviv.
Yeah, well, they're travelling in buses, cars, vans, around 1,500 people, we are being told, across the north of the continent, with their destination being the border crossing between Egypt and Gaza. We understand the latest information is that many of them are in western Libya right now, seeking to get into Egypt. I think the big question has been in recent days how the Egyptians will respond to all of this. Of course, in order to gain access to that crucial border crossing, they are going to need approval from the Egyptians to get there. But I should also mention the Israelis, as you might imagine, keeping a very close eye on all of this. We have a statement from the Defence Minister here who has called on the Egyptian authorities to prevent the arrival of jihadist protesters, in his words, at the Egypt-Israeli border and to not allow them to carry out these provocations. I think the next 24 hours are going to be crucial to understand whether this convoy can indeed make it to Gaza.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says he will visit areas affected by the recent floods in the Eastern Cape province tomorrow to assess the damage. The announcement comes as search and rescue efforts continue for missing people, including 4 students who were travelling in a minibus taxi that was swept away by flood waters. At least 57 people are known to have died and hundreds more have been displaced. Ramaphosa was speaking during the inaugural Africa Green Hydrogen Summit in Cape Town.
I will be going there tomorrow to go and see exactly how our people are suffering there and how we can console the families and how we can come up with assistant measures from a disaster point of view to give real support to ordinary people, those who have suffered this loss, and we pay our condolences to those families that have lost their loved ones, and how we can support the Eastern Cape government to deal with this disaster.
And South Africa's economic freedom fighters leader Julius Malema has written to President Cyril Ramaphosa seeking the establishment of a commission of inquiry into the state of the National Prosecuting Authority. Malema cites recent remarks by the NPA head Shamila Batoy of alleged infiltration in the NPA as the reason behind the request. He further states that this is a matter of grave constitutional significance. Kani Mapanga has more on that story.
Malema further requests that such a commission be chaired by retired Chief Justice Mogoeng, who, according to the EFF leader, held a tenure that was quote-unquote independent from political influence. The EFF leader calls on the president to act decisively to restore the integrity of the prosecutorial system, not only for the sake of its functionality, but to reaffirm our collective commitment to justice, accountability, and the rule of law.
And the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees' latest Global Trends report has revealed that a record 123.2 million people were forcibly displaced by the end of 2024 due to conflict, persecution and rights violations. Sudan has now overtaken Syria as the world's largest displacement crisis. UNHCR Global Spokesperson Eugene Bien.
And then what is most significant of the Sudan number is that the crisis continue, the funding decrease at the same time. And then we're heavily dependent on the hostility of host community inside of Sudan as well as a neighboring country. And when you see the neighboring country of Sudan, Chad, South Sudan, there is still ongoing challenges in those countries. And top of that, the South Sudan is also having a conflict at the moment, pushing the people toward the Sudan because they literally have no choice but flee to the country who is experiencing the conflict itself.
And the police chief in India's Ahmedabad says more than 200 bodies have been recovered from the plane crash site so far. He says more than 40 injured people have been taken to hospital. Details are still coming in. Most of those on board the Air India flight were Indian. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi has described the crash as heartbreaking beyond words. Ranjir Jaswal is a spokesperson for the India External Affairs Ministry.
What has happened in Ahmedabad is a very tragic accident. We have lost a lot of people. We extend our deepest condolences to all those who have lost their loved ones. It's still an evolving situation. Rescue operations are on, so you'll have to wait a little more time for exact details to be put out.
And finally, a court in Taiwan has sentenced a Chinese ship captain to 3 years in prison for damaging an undersea communications cable in the Taiwan Strait. There have been a number of such incidents in recent years off Taiwan, which it blames on China. Beijing denies involvement, saying that they are common maritime accidents. The BBC's Warren Ball has more on this story.
In February, a ship called Hongtai 58 was anchored off Taiwan's southern coast for several days. After the Togolese-registered vessel was ordered to leave, Taiwan's Coast Guard discovered that a fibre optic underwater cable had been severed, causing hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage. The ship was escorted back to port, and 7 of its crew were deported to China. The captain, identified by his surname Wang, was tried in a Taiwanese district court. He denied intentionally destroying the cable.
Get the news, music, and lifestyle of Africa on Channel Africa, the African perspective. At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa.
And it's just about 10 minutes past 9 here on Africa World Hour. Do stay with us. Still lots to discuss here on the program. We'll be talking about food insecurity, particularly in Sudan, and how many millions of children are under threat of severe malnutrition. We'll also talk to you about Father's Day, upcoming day on Sunday, what the state of fatherhood, so to speak, is here in South Africa. How many children actually grow up with their fathers, and of course the financial stresses that fathers face. But first, let's tell you about this. According to a report on Reuters, the United States is discouraging other governments from attending next week's high-level United Nations conference. This on reinvigorating the two-state solution, state between Palestinians and Israelis. The news agency cites a U.S. diplomatic cable sent earlier this week. In the cable, the US warns countries that taking anti-Israeli actions after the conference will be viewed as acting in opposition to U.S. foreign policy interests and possible diplomatic consequences from Washington. This comes as the United States is evacuating non-essential staff and families from certain missions and military bases in the region. This amidst an apparent deadlock in nuclear negotiations between the United States and Iran over advancements in Tehran's nuclear program. Joan Bryce Peace has more on this report.
The two-state solution conference is being co-hosted by close US allies France and Saudi Arabia to chart an action-oriented, irreversible path towards a comprehensive and lasting peace between Israel and Palestine on the two-state formula. The meeting, which runs from June 17th through the 20th, will include thematic roundtables on key issues, including security for both sides, humanitarian reconstruction, and the economic viability of a Palestinian state. South Africa will be represented by Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola.
Can you confirm that the president is no longer supporting a two-state solution?
The White House press secretary, Carolyn Levitt, was asked if President Trump no longer supported a two-state solution after U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, indicated that Washington was no longer pursuing the goal of an independent Palestinian state.
Right now, the president views the situation in Israel and Gaza as deeply unfortunate and needing to end. And the president is realistic about the current state of affairs in this region of the world. And that's why the president has said the number one focus and priority of the administration is to release all of the hostages from Gaza and to end this conflict as soon as possible. The administration is still pushing very hard for the release of all the hostages. And as for what happens next, clearly Gaza is an uninhabitable place. It needs to be rebuilt with the help of our Arab partners, and the president wants to see that happen as well.
UN spokesperson Farhan Haq asked for his reaction to the US cable.
I believe that all the member states of the system will make their own decisions accordingly to what their own interests are. But we expect that there will be widespread attendance at this meeting.
This was the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres a week earlier.
My message to world leaders and delegations is that it is absolutely essential to keep alive the two-state solution perspective with all the terrible things we are witnessing in Gaza and in the West Bank. And for those that doubt about the two-state solutions, I ask, what is the alternative? Is it a one-state solution in which either the Palestinians are expelled or the Palestinians will be forced to live in their land without rights? That would be totally unacceptable. I firmly believe that it is the duty of the international community to do everything to keep the two-state solution alive and then to materialize the conditions to make it happen.
The US posture comes in a broader context of solidarity with Israel, including imposing sanctions on judges of the International Criminal Court over warrants issued against Israeli leaders over alleged war crimes in Gaza, and Washington's condemnation of sanctions imposed by the United Kingdom, Canada, Norway, New Zealand and Australia on two sitting right-wing Israeli cabinet ministers for undermining the two-state solution. Listen to UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
These two individuals, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, have been inciting violence against Palestinian people for months and months and months. They have been encouraging egregious abuses of human rights. We have been raising this with the Israeli government, both privately and publicly, and alongside our partners, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway. Today we are announcing sanctions against those individuals because we have been absolutely clear. This has to stop, and we stand for a two-state solution.
In addition to these developments, the United States is evacuating non-essential staff from its embassy in Baghdad, Iraq, while the Pentagon will allow military dependents to leave locations around the Middle East due to a heightened risk in the region. journalist asked President Trump about this development.
We're hearing reports that U.S. personnel are being moved out of the region within striking distance.
Well, they are being moved out because it could be a dangerous place, and we'll see what happens. But they are being, we've given notice to move out, and we'll see what happens.
Is there anything that could be done to dial the temperature down in the region?
They can't have a nuclear weapon. Very simple.
President Trump also indicated this week that he was growing less confident that Tehran would agree to stop enriching uranium as part of a new US-led negotiation over Iran's nuclear program, which could lead to sanctions relief. Iran has long stated that it does not seek to develop a nuclear weapon, and its defense minister Aziz Nazirzadeh told reporters Wednesday that were Iran to be subjected to strikes, it would retaliate by hitting US bases in the region. CBS News reports that US officials had been told that Israel was fully ready to launch an operation into Iran, and that Iran could retaliate against certain American sites in the region. I'm Shervin Bryce-Pease in New York.
And it is 17 minutes past 9. If you've just joined us, welcome. This is Africa World Hour here on Channel Africa, the African perspective. Now, the nutrition crisis in South Sudan is worsening. Conflict in Upper Nile has displaced thousands, restricted humanitarian access, and pushed two counties, Nasir and Ulang, to the brink of famine. Over 2.3 million children are now at risk of acute malnutrition. We're joined by Ruth Situma, Chief of Nutrition for UNICEF in South Sudan, to discuss the current situation, the challenges on the ground, and what's urgently needed to prevent further deterioration. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Situma.
Thank you so much, Tsepiso, for having me.
So just looking at the latest report that you've put out, the last time famine was confirmed in Sudan was 2017. Are the levels anywhere closer to what we saw then?
Thank you so much. The situation in South Sudan currently is quite dire. And what I can say is that we do not have famine in South Sudan currently. What we see is that a high population is food insecure, and with 7.7 million people who cannot access enough food for them to meet their basic needs. We are also seeing that high numbers of children with acute malnutrition, 2.3 million. This is up from 2.1 million that we had projected at the beginning of the year. This means about 10% increased in the number of children with acute malnutrition. And what is also more worrying is that over 700,000 of those children are at high risk of death because of severe acute malnutrition. And actually, for this type of children who with at risk of severe acute malnutrition are 12 times at risk of dying. So it's quite worrying, but we are not. We cannot say that we are famine for South Sudan at the moment.
Okay, so there is no famine, and not to minimize it, but just to get a clearer idea of just how dangerous the levels of acute malnutrition or lack of access to food are. So the levels that we saw in 2017 and what we're seeing now, your report says that 11 of the 13 counties are now facing emergency levels of hunger. What did it take to reach that point in 2017?
Yeah, so if for you to reach these levels of hunger or high levels of acute malnutrition, it's driven by many factors. As you know, we have had number of recurrent conflicts in the country, and when these recurrent conflicts do happen, what it means is that population is displaced. That means they're not able to access their livelihood as they should. They're not also able to have access, for example, the services, and they are most likely in IDP or congested spaces where they're not able to just live a normal life. So this is one of the big factor. Another factor is that we've had recurrent floods in South Sudan. So with the floods, it means, again, populations are displaced. They are not able to live a normal life. They are not able to access their normal livelihood, and also services, basic health and nutrition services, for example, with the displacement. And we know that for example, with some of the outbreaks of diseases like the current cholera or even malaria, early detection is critical. And once you detect and be able to treat people, then we can also be able to prevent, malnutrition by doing so. So a number of factors. Also, in the recent past, we've seen also the impact of economic crisis, with the inflation, and therefore making more and more families not able to access enough food for them to meet their basic needs. So quite a number of factors, drivers actually, as we call them, that are driving up the food insecurity, as well as also the high levels of acute malnutrition. And just to say, for example, in South Sudan, only less than 2% of the children, young children, are accessing enough food for them to grow and develop well, which is very, 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 very low. And there's there's concerted effort really to improve the quality of diets that the young children are accessing in South Sudan. Will continue to see these high levels of malnutrition.
And where does the food come from? Is it from aid donation, or is it because, as you say, other parts of the country have seen improvement when it comes to food security classification?
Yeah. Yes, the food comes from multiple sources. We have, of course, quite a number of, various types of livelihoods that are present in South Sudan. So we have those who are on the riverine, who are doing fishing. We also have food from farmers, people growing the food. We also have those in urban areas, like, for example, in Juba, where we are, where they buy from the market. And of course, for those who are displaced, or, for example, the refugee and the displaced population who depend also on aid. So there are multiple sources of food. But we see that most of the time, this food doesn't necessarily, in some of the areas where it's food insecure, that also the children are more affected because they are not getting enough to eat. So even if the population is getting enough to eat, the children are not necessarily getting the diverse diet that they require for them to grow and develop well. And for the children, this is what they need when they're young, to get enough nutrients for them to be able to grow and develop well.
You say humanitarian access in conflict situations is difficult, and that is understandable, but I just want to juxtapose this with another aid agency, a non-governmental organization, that was just saying that UN assistance on the ground, particularly in Sudan, is also very bare or scarce. Is it because of the conflict, or are there other reasons why? Because we know that ODA cuts are also affecting UN resources.
Just maybe speaking about, for example, the nutrition services in South Sudan today, services for nutrition are 100% dependent on external support. Very limited or absent domestic investment in the provision of nutrition services. So, of course, when we see changes in the funding landscape globally, and even in the humanitarian sector in South Sudan, it also impacts the provision of services in South Sudan. And we've seen that actually some of the health and nutrition sites closing down because there is no enough resources to be able to go around and reach all the children who are malnourished. One of the things is that in South Sudan, the cost of treatment for children with malnutrition is quite high because of infrastructure, maybe because of also the fact that the infrastructure is not as developed, and because of this, the cost of treatment is quite high. It's at $200 per child. So if you have, for example, 700,000 children who are severely malnourished, then it means that you need quite a lot of money to be able to reach all the children. So with the changing funding landscape and reducing funding, especially to the humanitarian sector, is impacting the provision of services in South Sudan.
Okay. So just a final question. How much, obviously, as you say, conflict destroys so many other things, including the infrastructure of access to markets, therefore causing food prices to spiral out of control. Is this also partly what is affecting external donations, or you say support that you would need? How is it affecting your abilities to help those without?
Say that again. I did not hear the question.
Okay, sorry, it's because you were nodding, so I thought you were hearing me and in agreement. So I was saying, you were saying the infrastructure that is destroyed includes that of the markets, and that naturally sends food prices spiraling out of reach, particularly for those you're trying to help. I'm saying, does that also affect you as the UN agency's ability to source more food, more resources to those for those who are in need?
Yeah. Yes, it does have impact, and more importantly, the impact is actually in making sure that the resources or the supplies that we already have in country can reach those who need it the most. For example, at the moment, we have some of the supplies that we have either here in Juba or in different locations that we cannot be able to move to where the population require it because of access issues. So it's affecting our ability in terms of reaching the children and the women who need it most in those particular locations. And this is really more heightened in the areas that are conflict affected, where we are not able to reach with the much needed health and nutrition services. So yes, it does have impact, especially in terms of making sure that those much needed supplies reach the children and the women that require it in those geographical areas.
Well, Ruth Situma, thank you so much for your time, and we wish you all the best in your mission. Ruth Situma is Chief of Nutrition for UNICEF South Sudan, sharing some insights on the growing nutrition crisis there. It is 29 minutes past 9.
We are on Open Views Audio Bouquet. Channel 628. Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine, weekdays 6 till 9.
In recent weeks, East Africa has seen a disturbing rise in human rights violations. In Kenya, digital activist Rose Njeri was arrested under the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act after creating a tool for citizens to oppose the Finance Bill 2025. Meanwhile, in Tanzania, Kenyan activist Boniface Mwangi and Ugandan lawyer Agatha Atuhaire reported being detained, tortured, and sexually assaulted by security officers.
East Africa needs a reset. We need to get back East Africa to where the founding fathers are. When President Nyerere and his colleagues Jomo Kenyatta and the Ugandan counterparts fought for independence. They fought for independence to get Africans out of poverty, to get Africans out of slavery. The leaders who took up power have since gotten into regression.
Neto Agostino, co-leader of the United Green
to get Africans out of poverty, to get Africans out of slavery. The leaders who took up power have since gotten into regression.
Neto Agostino, co-leader of the United Green Movement Party.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine. We are on Open Views Audio Bouquet. Channel 628.
Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And we continue with the latest news from here, the continent, and beyond here on Africa World Hour. So this time we speak about the World Health Organization. It's launched its Disability Health Equity Initiative this week to tackle the unfair health gaps faced by people with disabilities. Over 1.3 billion people live with disabilities, yet they are still the most marginalized globally. For more on this initiative, we speak to Dr. Chiara Rettis, a team lead for the Violence, Injuries and Disability Unit at the WHO Regional Office for Africa. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So, Dr. Rettis, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but let's first start with what are the main goals for this initiative and just how dire is the situation for persons with disabilities?
Thank you for the question. So this initiative, as you can tell from the name, has the vision of health equity for persons with disabilities. And to do that, we need to close the health gaps between persons with disabilities and the broader population. So what we want to see are simply better health outcomes for persons with disability than we see now.
What are the biggest health gaps in terms of equity for persons with disability beyond infrastructure?
Let's look at some of the estimations and statistics that are available globally. Persons with disabilities have a premature mortality. That means that persons with disability die up to 20 years earlier than the rest of the population. Also, persons with disabilities have highest risk of diseases. For example, they have double the risk to have diabetes or cardiovascular diseases or also depression, and this irrespective of the impairment that they live with. Also, another type of inequity is the fact that persons with disabilities have to face daily functional limitations, for example, immobility, so simply moving to one place to the other, from home to the health facility, or communicating, so facing barriers in expressing their needs or interacting with healthcare providers, for example. And all these inequities are due to barriers at different levels of the health system.
Okay, so are they more vulnerable to, say, non-communicable diseases or some of the ailments that you mentioned because of their conditions or lack of treatment or lack of access to treatment?
So, to explain it a bit better, persons with disabilities do not have higher risk because of their condition, but because they have less access to health programs such as health promotion or prevention, vaccination campaigns, or even campaigns on healthy lifestyle that tend to address the risk factors for non-communicable diseases like mobility or a healthy diet or accessing information, for example, about the risk of tobacco use. So the limitations they face in accessing simply those informations put them at the highest risk of developing diseases.
Just the basic minimum national level actions to strengthen disability inclusion across the health systems, what would you say there are, and how many UN member states have that in place?
So there are several countries and member states who do conduct strategies, they have strategies, or there are initiatives to address the needs of persons with disabilities. But what often lacks is a systemic approach. So looking at strengthening the way the health system is made accessible for persons with disabilities so that they can access all the range of services that they need. And you won't be surprised to hear that persons with disabilities need to access all the range of services as any other person in the population, from maternal health to, as we said, vaccination campaign, or and of course the specific services that are required for some of their conditions. So the gaps that we are seeing now is a lack of comprehensive work around data around disability, attitudes of the personnel and health workers that might represent also a barrier because of some discrimination and stigma. The accessibility, of course, of building and communication, and least but not last, the participation of persons with disabilities in the development, design of services, in the capacity to provide feedback around services, and also in developing policies. So having persons with disabilities at the center of the policy work is a condition to be able to design the services as in order to be more inclusive.
And as Dr. Tedros said earlier on in I think May, when you've had various summits to discuss this, that you cannot achieve universal health coverage without this community. Our government, or actually do governments have indicators, credible indicators that are in place to actually understand what the inequity levels are in their countries?
So at the national level, it is rare to see data disaggregated by disability. For example, when we look at the targets that help us track universal health coverage, for example, the number of women who have access to essential maternal health care, often we do not see the figures related to women with disabilities. For example, are women with disabilities having access to those services? And the lack of this data, of course, cannot help improve the services. So this is one thing that can be done. When we look at the Sustainable Development Goals more generally, which is what any member state is aiming at, we do have these global targets and the motto of leaving no one behind. And when we mean no one behind, we really refer to any person with a disability or without a disability. So they need to be in the picture. Otherwise, it will not be possible for any member state to reach universal health coverage and reach the broader sustainable development goals, of course.
So at the summit now in June, what were the major concerns that were aired, and also the expressions of hope in how far you've come in this journey?
So this is the first global WHO initiative that has the aim to enhance health equity for persons with disabilities. But it is built on a big network of stakeholders from all over the world, from all the regions and countries, that include also organizations of persons with disabilities, civil society organizations, and member states that are particularly active in this sense. So as we said earlier, there are many initiatives that are very positive. But what it is needed today is that everyone comes together to work together to work towards a common goal. which is the goal of health equity for persons with disabilities.
I mean, some of the recommendations that you make is they need to build leadership on health equity amongst persons with disabilities, but particularly in things like financial resources. What programs are in place and what partnerships are you looking at to develop these tools?
So, political prioritization is, of course, one of the most urgent actions that are needed. And in order, when we say political prioritizations, we also mean allocation of resources. So let's look, for example, at big global programs, for example, to address pandemics in all over the world, and this is also particularly relevant for the African region, or big programs that work on maternal health and newborn health, no, to reduce mortality and morbidity for women and babies. These big programs are very important because they can really make a difference if they start to better embed principles of disability inclusion in their strategies. So these are the type of partnerships that can have a big impact today. And of course, at the national levels, bringing together any existing initiative and stakeholders that are active in this sense with persons with disability at the center.
And just finally, what other technical guidance or knowledge is needed to change the system?
Available. For example, WHO has launched, as published a few years ago, a global report on health equity with disabilities, where the root causes of inequities are described, where recommendations are given to ensure a more comprehensive work around health equity. The Disability Guide for Action toolkit is an available resource, a technical resource to the attention of the ministries of health in particular, that can be guided towards this work. With recommendations that go starting from how to better engage persons with disabilities in their policy review and definition of programs, how to improve data collection and tracking on persons with disabilities, how to make the full range of services relevant for persons with disabilities, and how, in particular, to make sure that essential packages of care, and so looking at all the programs that focus on primary health care, take into consideration and remove barriers to access to these services, so around the packages of care, and of course the accessibility. Not only about buildings and infrastructure, but also how the communication, so how to make communication accessible in different forms for people with different impairments.
And I just want to end on this final note. You say different impairments. We know that a lot of people generally globally are still trying to understand or see mental health as an illness, and this is one of the pillars that you have as part of the program in creating equity within the health system.
Of course, and this is a very important point. There is a lot of misunderstanding around what living with a disability means. When we talk about persons with disabilities, we really talk about any type of health condition that, together with barriers in the environment, reduce functioning and reduce participation in the society. And this includes physical impairments, intellectual, psychosocial impairments, sensorial disability, and so on. So, and it is true that mental health conditions are often, they take a little bit more of difficulties in understanding and being considered and included in an inclusive way in the range of services and among attitudes also of health workers and even the population in general. So this initiative, this global initiative, has this ambition to really not to leave anyone behind and to consider all these type of disabilities, even the more neglected as of today.
Dr. Chiara Retis, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it for sharing your knowledge with us and the program that you're working on. She's a team lead for the Violence, Injuries and Disability Unit at the WHO Regional Office for Africa, as she talks to us about the launch of the WHO Global Initiative on Health Equity for Persons with Disabilities. It brings the time to 14 minutes to 10.
Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
The Midnight Snack, 12 to 3 a.m.
Interracial relationships. And now you are based in the States and you are married to a beautiful white woman, white lady.
I learned that, for us in our culture, we literally can speak our mind. I remember when we had started dating and whatnot, and, she picked up like a little bit of weight. And me, I was like, oh, wow, you must be happy in this relationship because look at you. You look great. You're even picking up some weight. And she got really, really offended. And it took I think it was about a couple of hours before I could realize that, because I could tell that she was off after that. And it took me a while to figure out what it was. Until later when I was talking to her, I'm like, you're really, really off today. And then she expressed that, because you're telling me that I'm picking up some weight. And I'm like, in my culture, when you are gaining some weight, it means you're happy.
Yes.
So that's what I was trying to imply.
The Midnight Snack, every Monday, 12 to 3 a.m. with Chanduko Ligege.
Africa, voici Abedi.
Oui, c'est moi.
Abedi est un passionné de musique dans l'âme. Il a un goût pour toutes sortes de musique et passe ses journées à écouter Channel Africa.
J'aime beaucoup la musique africaine.
Ok. Devinez quoi? Channel Africa veut aider Abedi et les mélomanes du monde entier à découvrir encore plus de musique incroyable. C'est pourquoi Channel Africa appelle les artistes africains à soumettre leur musique. Chers artistes, n'oubliez pas de nous fournir toutes vos informations pertinentes à l'email adresse musique@channelafrica.co.za. Les soumissions sont votre chance d'être entendues, mais elles ne garantissent pas une playlist. Toutes les soumissions seront soigneusement examinées pour voir si elles répondent aux exigences de notre station. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Embrace our young voices. This month, Channel Africa, celebrating Youth Month.
It's Youth Month and it's Father's Day on Sunday. And unfortunately, the case of youth also becoming fathers plays into the situation, the question, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But let's look about what happens on Father's Day. Lots of spending, a lot of celebrating of people for being fathers, but how many of them are actually present? So the financial stress is pushing many South African fathers to edge and often out of their families' lives. At the National Debt Advisors, most male clients seek help only when it's too late, it seems. To speak about this, we're joined by Dehan Sherman, Process Development and Change Manager at the National Debt Advisors, to speak to us about the connection between debt, masculinity and mental health. Why it's time to change the way we talk about fatherhood. A very good evening to you, Dehan, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
I think even though we know it instinctively and because we've lived through it, we don't really think about Father's Day, fatherhood in those terms, masculinity, debt, and mental health. So tell me a little bit about what you've gleaned from it and why Father's Day was the day you chose to highlight some of these things.
So interesting enough, we found that the daughter was contrary to popular belief. It was contrary to what the general consensus was. It was contrary to what our perceptions are of the dynamic within South African households. There were some really interesting statistics that we felt would be very important to highlight during this time, because it gives some context as to what men go through as well. So with that being said, we look at, for example, the fact that South Africa has such a high suicide rate. South Africa is rated 10th in the world for suicides, and men are 5 times more likely to commit suicide than women. You couple that with the current economic climate, with unemployment, with the fact that 1 in 3 domestic abuse victims are actually men, which was I honestly didn't know that. That was actually a huge surprise to me. So it's contrary to what you might expect. And so we thought it would be best to highlight these issues, because it's necessary to also make it known to the public that there's two sides to every coin.
And a very important points to make. So I want us to delve deeper into it. So obviously, society has changed and the culture has changed as well. But if we say 35% of children in South Africa live with their biological fathers, does that mean it's because more and more men are not put in a situation where there is a setup for them to take on the role of fatherhood? Because we are seeing more and more single parent households, and a lot of those are led by women, and in some cases quite a significant number by children. What is happening there?
So you see that the dynamic is quite, I would say, varied. We're seeing that there's always been this sort of mindset that gender roles exist throughout human history. That hasn't changed much. And now that we've gotten to a point in our current modern day society where the whole concept of men having to be the providers and women having to stay home and take care of the children, that's impractical. It's not possible anymore. Firstly, we're in an economic climate where it's not possible for men to always provide for their families. With unemployment rate as it is, it isn't realistic. However, because these outdated societal expectations still exist within many cultures as well as religions, it creates more harm than good, because the world isn't what it was, and it's a lot more complicated to have to provide for your family if you're unemployed, and if the prospects of obtaining employment isn't that great. And that's besides the fact that prices increase, and there are obviously other dynamics involved. But the main point here is that there's still a lot of pressure on men to fulfill a certain role, and because they can't fulfill that role, it creates emotions such as shame, and it pushes men to the point where they feel as though their children and their families are better off without them.
I want to understand, if we're saying contemporary society obviously has changed, therefore the social cultural norms and standards, and you talk about gender roles as well. So there's no longer that prosaic understanding of what a man is in relationships that have also evolved. Are we still seeing that being enforced where, for instance, in same-sex relationships, in transgender situations, is that still a factor if we're talking about, for instance, Father's Day, but also the financial pressures faced by fathers?
So within this context, we're talking about the traditional relationships. Okay. So we're talking about a male and a female. As for the newer age relationships, same sex, those dynamics are entirely different. Those gender roles don't necessarily exist within that context, purely because of the dynamic of the relationship itself. So we're talking about primarily the traditional sense of, or the traditional relationship, and we still see that a lot of the cultural as well as religious aspects are still being enforced in many of today's relationships. Yes, the times have changed. Yes, society has evolved. However, there are still large portions of South African population which relies heavily on their cultural norms and as well as their religious norms, which enforce gender roles. So we also need to take into account these are factors that aren't going to go away overnight. Culture remains with you, and it's ingrained in who you are. So we also need to keep in mind that we have these preconceived notions that are still in play within the dynamics of many relationships within South Africa.
And obviously, your upbringing was inculcated into your understanding of masculinity within a patriarchal role will play a role in that. So I want to look at your clientele, or what the NDA says. Over 60% of your clients are men aged between 29 and 48. Is it safe to assume that they are naturally fathers? And what do they understand their role in terms of provider being? Even if, as you say, these tough economic times, the wife probably still has a job, but the male role is unable to find work for whatever reason.
Also, based on our stats, only 60% of our clients are men. However, 76% of joint debt review applications are led by male applicants. So they are the main applicants, and they choose to take that role on to have to manage the debt review affairs or be the first point of contact. It isn't necessarily always safe to assume that all of them are fathers, because that wasn't part of the statistics that we reported. What we are finding is that there is an association with the proportion of men who are perceived as leading their households in relation to the low rate in which fathers would be involved in their children's lives. So we're seeing that there is some correlation, as well as the fact that there's still this concept and of what a man should be and what a man should be responsible for, and that concept alone adds a lot of pressure, undue pressure, but it adds a lot of pressure. And when men feel like they can't live up to those expectations, that impacts their self-image, it impacts their self-worth. Yes.
I want to ask this question just to round up before we run out of time. So then on days like Father's Day, then if you're thinking about debt and where you are in the mental health aspect of it, can you just share a little bit with us what you found through the conversations, through the statistics?
So what we found is that many of these financially strained consumers, being a lot of them men, they're the ones that tend to feel as though they need to take responsibility for all the entire household finance, even though they have partners that assist them. All that pressure they take on that responsibility, and that.
Dehan, have we lost you? What a pity. What a pity. At just a pivotal moment, very fascinating discussion that we're having there with Dehan Sherman. He is with National Debt Advisors, speaking to us about Father's Day. And okay, I believe you're back, Dylan. So just a quick wrap up there.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I think my internet's unstable. So what I was saying is that what we found is that they, especially within consumers that are under debt review, men seem to take on a lot of the responsibilities over finances, even though they have partners that do also contribute or are the main contributors. Many of those men are unemployed, while the wife is the main contributor, but they tend to choose to take control over the situation and take responsibility for it on their own, which creates that undue pressure. And that also creates a situation where they may try and achieve things that may be otherwise unachievable.
Dan, really appreciate it. Fascinating discussion, as I say, just drawing the link between dead masculinity and mental health as we go into Father's Day this Sunday. Dehan Sherman is Process Development and Change Manager at National Debt Advisors. That's how we come to the end of Africa World Hour. Shayla and Dukumana up next with hotlines from us. Good night.